This is a leadership series of lessons, which I'm calling climate change. Climate change. And what we're going to be doing, and it's looking at the change that needs to be implemented in any type of organization, how you go about that. How do you implement that and make it successful? This first lesson that I'm going to share with you, I'm calling it, What's the Temperature? What's the temperature? That's the first thing that you have to determine as a leader, is what is the climate of the organization which I'm leading? And of course, I'm speaking most likely to a pastor or a spiritual leader. What is the climate of the church? Is the climate conducive to change, or is it resisting change? Is it conducive? If it's not conducive to it, then I'm going to have to go at this very carefully, step by step, to be able to successfully accomplish change. I really believe that the need to initiate and implement planned change from within an organization is one of the biggest challenges a leader is going to face. Now, let me say up front, there's basically two types of leaders. You have leaders that are leaders, and they see themselves in that role as implementing change, bringing about progress. Then you have managers. And sadly, I'm afraid that too many of our so-called leaders are simply managers. Managers never are trying to change anything. And so that is a mistake. In these lessons, I'm going to share with you ideas and concepts how you can help to implement change in your organization. Now, the first thing that you have to do, you must determine what type of organization you are leading. What type? And there's basically two types that I want to deal with. And of course, all of our organizations, all of our churches are at different stages and different levels, but there's basically two kinds of organizations. The first one I want to talk about is what I'm going to call voluntary associations. And I think this is where the majority of us are as pastors, as leaders. We're leading voluntary associations. Let me give you some of the characteristics of these voluntary associations. Most of them are along these lines. The first thing that you find is long-time friendship ties, or I could even call it family ties. Long-time friendship relationships or ties. Most of these organizations have been around for a while. They've been around long enough that they are oriented toward the past. And so they think back of all these different friendships and relationships they had. Secondly, I would call it strong family relationships. In other words, their connection to the church or to the organization is not so much through that organization as it is through their family. That's where their commitment is. That's where their covenant is. It's with the family. What does my family think about this? And so this is one of the things that you'll find of a voluntary association. They have strong family relationships. It's why many times we will refer to it as somebody's church, and we'll call the name of a particular family. And then another thing that you find in voluntary associations is long-standing traditions and shared past experiences. Oh my. When you start talking about traditions, beware of allowing your traditions to become sacred. That is a problem. And if that is what you have in your church, then you're leading a voluntary association. Here's another characteristic. Institutional loyalties to the denomination or the church. In other words, they're not committed to you as a leader. They're not committed to whatever your vision may be that you're trying to give to that congregation. No, their loyalties is to the church or the denomination. That's where their loyalties lie. Here's another one of the characteristics. They have strong affection for former leaders. They talk about the good old days. They think back of these leaders, and of course they always make them better than they actually were. They make saints out of them. And they have strong affection toward them. And I'm not saying they were bad people. They were probably good people. But that's where their loyalties are. Their loyalties are not with you as a leader. Their loyalties lie with the past, with former leaders. They have what we would call a powerful past orientation. That's where they're continually looking, is back over their shoulder. That's what they're continually remembering, is the good old days. And their focus is not on the present or the future, it is on the past. Here's another characteristic of a voluntary association. They have widely shared affection for the church property, which is filled with sacred memories. Oh my. Again, you can see their focus is totally on the past, but they remember when grandmother was just a girl, you know. They remember when their mother got married. They remember, you know, that's what is so important to them. These are the memories that they cherish. They come from the past. And it's because of this, because of these shared beliefs and experiences, that creates an institutional environment that resists change. The moment you start talking about changing anything, you're touching somebody's sacred cow. The moment you start talking about change, you're going to be offensive to some family in the church. And that's where their loyalties are, is with the different covenant groups in the church, their families, rather than to you as the leader trying to implement change. See, their very view of change is wrong. The way they view change, they look at change as a threat rather than as a challenge. Now that is a problem, because the truth is, change is inevitable. We cannot stop change. The only things that don't change are things that are dead. And if we're going to stay alive, if we're going to make a difference, then we have to embrace change. We need to make a friend of change. But as long as you view change as a threat to you, you're going to resist it. You're going to do everything that you can to stop the change from happening. Now, here is one of the biggest problems in a voluntary association. And every leader has got to face this fact. If I'm leading a voluntary association, everyone that is a member of that voluntary association, they retain the right to withdraw at any time. Anything that happens, I'm out of here, I'm leaving, I'm gone. And as long as you have people that are not committed to the relationship, it's going to be impossible for you to implement change. So every member of a voluntary association is looking forward. Well, I'm not going to agree with that. I'll withhold my tithes. I'm not going to attend. And so because of this makes change more difficult and time-consuming. It's almost impossible for you to be able to lead change if you are leading, or I'd say managing would be a better word, a voluntary association. If that's where you are, then you need to deal with that fact. There has to be some steps taken to change the organization from a voluntary association to the second group that I want to talk about. The second group is what I'm going to call covenant communities. covenant communities. Covenant communities, they call themselves churches. They have the different names for their organization, just like a voluntary association does. But they work completely differently. Let me give you some of the characteristics that you'll find in a covenant community. Here's some of the common characteristics. They have a clearly stated belief system. I mean, they're able to give you exactly what their values are, what is important to them, and the way that they're going to go about accomplishing it. The second thing is the leader is the founder. Now that shows a big difference between voluntary associations usually have a long past history. Covenant communities are usually very young. Young organizations, the leader is the founder. He is the one or she is the one that has begun this organization. And that brings us to the third point is there is an absence of local and denominational traditions. They haven't existed long enough to have established their own traditions. And so because of this, those are not the things that are important to them. Rather, what they have is what I would call a high level of religious commitment. They are committed to the vision. They are committed to each other. They are committed to their leader. They have entered into a covenant relationship with each other. They're not wanting out. They're just wanting to be all in. They're interested in what we can do to fulfill the vision of this covenant community. It's a very exciting thing because these people get a lot accomplished. Here's some more statistics or characteristics of a covenant community. They have a highly visible and specific goals. They have certain things they have decided, this is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to accomplish. And because of that, they get a lot done. Another characteristic is they have a powerful and optimistic view of the future. That's the opposite of a voluntary association. A voluntary association, it's the past. That was the good old days. That's what was sacred. They have a negative attitude toward the future. But the opposite, with a covenant community, they're very optimistic about the future. We're going to make a difference. Usually, in a covenant community, there is a strong teaching ministry. Now, this is highly significant because one of the things that brings about change is knowledge. Knowledge is power. And when you are able to communicate that clearly, effectively, the more people know, the easier it becomes for them to make changes. And so in a covenant community where people are committed to a common cause, they have a passionate commitment to global evangelization. Now you can see why my heartbeat is for covenant relationships. I'm really not interested in any other relationships. The relationships I want to invest in are covenant relationships because these people believe what I believe. They're committed to what I am committed to, and to that is global evangelization. In the covenant community functions on this assumption that every member of the covenant community is completely committed to the ideas, purpose, belief system, and goals of that movement. They're, as we call it, all in. They have made a covenant commitment to each other. They're not looking for a reason to leave. No, they're only looking for more reasons that they can dedicate and devote and commit themselves to fulfilling the purpose. And it's because of this high level of commitment. It eliminates the option of withdrawal from the covenant community. The covenant community, people aren't always trying to make up their mind whether they're going to leave or whether they're going to stay. No, they've already settled that issue. And the issue is, I'm all in. I'm committed to this. I want to see us fulfill the purpose for which God has created us, why God put us here in the first place. And because of this covenant relationship, it helps them to be able to make changes, to make decisions. In a voluntary association, it's always a democratic society where everybody's voting. There's so much politics. You don't find that in covenant communities. In a covenant community, the common beliefs of the covenant community makes change easier. They're easier to be able to lead these people because they are already committed to fulfilling their purpose. Now, the sad truth is, most denominations began as covenant communities. That's how they grew so large, so strong. They began as a covenant community, but most of them have devolved into voluntary associations. And because they've devolved into a voluntary association, they stop making a difference in our world. They stop being leaders. They become managers. Now let me talk about what I'm going to call our purpose of existence. It's one of the things that if you're going to be a leader, and not just a manager, if you're going to be a leader, then you're going to have to be able to define what is the purpose of your existence. Why are we here? For instance, in a voluntary association, the purpose is very complex. It's very complex. There's not one simple answer, one simple solution to it. It's complex. For instance, this is the way that they would view it. This is our church, and we've got to keep our people happy while we preach the gospel to them. Now, I see all kinds of red flags there. First of all, the moment that it becomes your church, and I'm not talking about being committed to a local church, I'm talking about Jesus said, upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. If it doesn't belong to Jesus, it's really not worth belonging to, being a part of. It's got to belong to Christ, his values. You've got to be committed to the things that Christ is committed to. But as long as you're trying to keep your people happy, now your people own you. And the truth is, keeping people happy is an exercise in futility. You can't keep anybody happy. No, including yourself. All you can do is make the choice, I am going to be happy. I'm going to smile and not frown. I'm going to sing and not complain. You can make that choice, but when you start trying to keep everybody else happy, you don't even know what they're thinking about, let alone how to keep them happy. And then trying to preach the gospel to them. See, you're going to have to make some changes in your leadership style to even bring them out of that kind of a mindset. In a covenant community, the purpose for existence is completely different. It's very simple. They've narrowed life down to a focus. This one thing I do. And basically in a covenant community, this is what they would say. We exist to reach this neighborhood and our world with the good news of Jesus Christ. I mean, they brought it down to a focus. They made it into a simple, common vision that everybody can embrace and say, yes, we want to be a part of that. I want to be a part of a church like that. I want to be committed to that. And so they keep it very simple, but very focused. In a voluntary association, it's the opposite. You have a powerful past orientation that places high value on traditions and shared past experiences. And because their focus is on the past, they're never going to be able to focus on making changes for a better future, a preferred future. Covenant communities are the opposite. Covenant communities are organized around changing the status quo and influencing tomorrow. They may want to make a difference in their world. They believe that is why they are here. That's the reason that God has put them in this place. Now, when you are in a voluntary association, then someone casts new vision. If it conflicts with sacred traditions, then it becomes very easy to rally the people to resist the change and seek to perpetuate yesterday's experiences. They don't want to go anywhere else. No, they dream about the good old days. They want to go back to the past. And so you're trying to go two different directions. And the Bible's very clear about this. How can two walk together unless they are agreed? And so when you have a voluntary association and everyone has these past precious experiences, they're not going to be interested in trying to move into a better future. And so just speaking from it from a natural viewpoint, voluntary associations naturally resist change. They're not interested in change. No, what they're interested in is preserving their sacred traditions. In a covenant communities are completely the opposite. They are naturally receptive to change. Covenant communities are looking for ways that we can do something that will make a difference. And so they are open to new ideas, to new concepts, to new thoughts. I hope this helps to answer the question for you. What kind of organization am I leading? What is this church? What is this organization? Is this a voluntary association or is it a covenant community? If it's a covenant community, then we'll be able to make a difference in our community, in our world. But if it's a voluntary association, I'm a manager and not a leader unless I become an influencer and I begin to start helping them in the baby steps toward change. And so I want to close this lesson by addressing a few thoughts here. Let me begin with this question. Is the ice beginning to melt? See, life is a journey, and whether we like it or not, change will come. Always is coming. The old die and the young are born. And so there's continual changing of generations, of ideas, of concepts. Life is a journey, and so there are things that can help us to begin to melt the ice. And when the ice begins to melt, that is a good time to implement change. You don't start trying to implement the change until the ice begins to melt. Another question that you can ask yourself is, am I a thermostat or am I a thermometer? A thermometer is simply someone that reads the status quo. They look at things what it is right now. A thermostat is trying to change the temperature, trying to do something that will make a difference. And so you have to look at yourself as a leader from your leadership perspective. Am I a thermometer or am I a thermostat? Now, in trying to judge, is the ice beginning to melt? Is this a good time to begin starting implementing change? There's three basic statements that I want to give you that I want you to focus on. People will change when they learn enough. So one of the things that you can begin to do is begin to improve your communication skills, your teaching skills. Knowledge is power. And if you begin to empower the people, then the people will begin to open up to change. What I've seen, so many people, they just don't know. And because they don't know, they are afraid. And because of their fears, they resist changing because they don't know what good change looks like. Here's the second thought. That is, people will change when they see enough. When you're able to cast vision. Now, in casting vision, I mean exactly what I'm saying. You've got to paint a picture of a preferred future. You've got to make it so clear to them that they begin to see it. When they begin to see it, then they begin to get excited about it. Then they're ready to, yes, that's a good idea. They're ready to change when they can see enough. And then the third concept is people will change when they hurt enough. Now that's a bad way to implement change. Change that is caused through pain becomes a win-lose situation because you remember the pain. Even though this is better, and even though we've made some advances, it was very painful getting here. That is not a good way to implement change. And so I would encourage you, focus on the first two thoughts, teaching them, instructing them, and casting vision, helping them to see a preferred future. I do not believe that God has called us to be thermometers. I do not believe that God has called us to be managers. No, I believe that God has called us as leaders to help change the climate. And if we're going to be the leaders that God called us to be, we're not going to leave the people where we found them. That's not good leadership. Good leadership is helping the people find a preferred future and helping them to move into that. That's leadership. And that's what God has called us to be. And so I pray that in these thoughts, as I share them with you, that you will be able to become a climate changer. And you'll be able to take what you have and redeem it and improve it. God help you to become a thermometer, a climate changer.